Well, welcome to all of you. Looking forward to our conversation. Daniel is going to come and present the climate portion of the Inflation Reduction Act and what we think some of the interesting possibilities are coming out of that, and and how things like that help tip systems. And so we'll be talking about that. In October, we're going to do another call at 1 o'clock Central on the 18th, third Tuesday of every month. And we're going to use that time as a kind of reflection. Let's check in and do an environmental scan and see what we're seeing and what we're noticing. Hey, Keisha, good to have you here. And Mary Ellen, great. And Lauren. And then in November, a woman, Susan Koblinger, who's been doing a lot of work on integrated health and healing techniques and the intersection of trauma and health. And she's going to talk about what she's learned and observed over 8 years of doing this work. And then Marianne, our very own Marianne, has been doing lots of really interesting work with a passion of hers around what can we learn about leadership and ourselves when we work with horses. And so she's going to share that story. So hi, Emily, Catherine. So I think it's time to just hand it over to Daniel.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It's so wonderful to see so many of you again. I love these calls. They're so stimulating and inspiring. Kathy, can you give me screen sharing capabilities? For some reason, it's not. I am looking forward to talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and hopefully making it meaningful to you. I don't know how much you have been following the details of this this huge impact act that was recently passed. So just by a quick show of hands, how many know a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act and what it means for you personally or your organization? A few? Okay, good. Well, I'm going to share, I think, kind of what you need to know about this. So I called this accelerating climate action because this is exactly what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing. It is accelerating climate action at the individual level and at the systems level. And I want to talk about an overview, kind of 6 key things to think through about what this means and why this is such a big deal. Then I'm going to go specifically into renewable energy, building efficiency, clean transportation, and I call them employee incentives, but individual actions. A lot of you are parts of organizations, so I like to leverage the organization to say, organizations can share this information with their employees. And I know we have a few folks on here from outside of the country. So maybe for you to reflect on is, what do you think this means for global climate policy when you understand some of the impacts here? So 6 big takeaways. 1, this is historic because it is the first time the United States has passed long-term tax policy around renewable energy and energy efficiency. It is 10 years of market stability that breeds investor confidence. In the past, the wind and solar and home energy tax credits have ebbed and flowed and started to taper off and then brought back depending on the whims of the administration and Congress. This is 10 years of locked-in tax policy. A second huge takeaway here is of the $370 billion that this bill allocates toward climate action. Depending who you talk to, 40 to 60 billion is allocated to environmental justice. This is showing up in terms of job creation and training. This is showing up of how dollars are allocated. You get additional bonuses in your tax credits or deductions if you're spending them in environmental justice designated communities, low income or disproportionately affected. Energy communities are called out. These are communities that have a lot of investment in fossil fuel energy that might see plant closures, coal plant closures, natural gas shifting to cleaner technologies. And so how do we ensure there's investment in these communities for job transitions and workforce development so families aren't left out without their job or their career that they had for decades? And there's other components of environmental justice. There's going to be funding that trickles down through state and local agencies to support activities in environmental justice areas. This bill, one of the reasons it passed is because it is creating millions of new jobs. They worked very closely with workforce development to ensure that when we're doing these incentives, we are going to create jobs through new demand with solar and wind and battery and automotive and home energy improvements. So a ton of investment going into manufacturing. And part of this is, again, how those tax credits and incentives scale up based on which pieces you're plugging into. Raise your hand if you have heard of carbon taxes and thought that that was going to be one of the big ways that policy was going to shift our behaviors, right? A couple of you. This is not a carbon tax at all. Carbon tax is more of a stick approach, punishment, fee for carbon because it's a pollutant. This is almost entirely about incentives, which is another reason why this bill passed. If you look back historically at US climate policy, Obama tried to pass more of a cap and trade. More recently, there was a lot of talk with carbon tax, even just a year ago with the Build Back Better. And what policy has learned in the US is that this incentive-based approach where it's kind of like everybody gets to win something is a much better policy for shifting the system. It's the, in living systems, the oak tree, right, grows towards the sun and then it lets go of the branches that are shaded and no longer serve it. And because you're going towards what you want, you start to let go of those old patterns rather than penalizing the old patterns and saying, stop doing that. Like don't quit or quit smoking, but what is it that smoking gave you? You need to figure out what that new healthier behavior is going to do. So there's a lot of behavior concepts in this for systems change. This is going to have a huge impact on individuals who take advantage of these incentives and rebates. The estimates are between $200 and $1,800 a year in energy utility savings between your home space and your vehicle if you do purchase an electric vehicle. And one of the big things that I'm super excited about is the Paris climate commitment. It says we need to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030. This is the closest we have ever gotten with this bill. If everybody takes advantage of it, will get us to about 40% emissions reductions by 2030. That is huge. Before this, I think we were on track for like 20% reduction or below. So huge. Like this gives me hope after all the doom and gloom of the climate IPCC reports, and we have to stay below 1.5. Like this actually puts the US on a pretty good track to get there. And the piece that's really both an opportunity and a challenge is that extra 10% gap is kind of up to us, right? It's up to us as individuals to go above and beyond what this incentivizes. It's up to us and our organizations and with our employers or the businesses that we're part of to say we want to do even more than what this Inflation Reduction Act calls out. So we're closer than ever before. There are a lot of people who are thinking that we can actually hit 50% by 2030 because this will catalyze action and accelerate things beyond what's even possible. One other caveat here is that 40% emissions reduction is what's expected and from the known portions of the bill, but there's a green bank fund that will invest and like guarantee loans for technology, clean technology, that we don't know how many emissions will be reduced by that. So there's a couple unknown pockets of money that have a multiplying effect, and it's hard to predict what that will be for emissions reduction. So I personally hope that this 40% is a conservative estimate. Okay, this is the nerdiest slide I have. The rest aren't this detailed, but it's fascinating to see that the baseline for these emission reduction targets are 2005. There's a couple of reasons for that. We were at a higher point back in 2005. There's been a lot of technological advances, but it also is kind of like the peak of when we were doing a lot of fossil fuel activity that was creating a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So if you look over time, you can start to see how we've been reducing emissions. It's gone down and up and down and up. And you can see 2020, the pandemic, when the economy was shut down in many ways. 2021 is back up. But then if you follow this orange line over to here, this was current policy with the Inflation Reduction Act. So we were set to get about 27% below 2005. What the Inflation Reduction Act that passed is this purple line. So there's a huge gap that we jumped over with this bill. It still doesn't get us to that 50% by 2030, but if this continues, we might be able to hit 50% by 2035, 2033. So again, it's very promising, and I think there's going to be some exponential acceleration here. So what's in the bill? This is a high level, where is the money going? And I'm not going to go into all of this. I'm going to focus primarily on the things that are impactful to you and your employers or the businesses that you're part of. There's clean electricity tax credits, air pollution and hazardous materials, transportation and infrastructure, individual tax incentives, manufacturing, that's that green job creation. You're going to see a lot more manufacturing happening in the US. And so there's a real focus on how can we make sure that's clean and not environmentally harmful. And there's challenges with that, but there's opportunities as well. There's money going into the vehicle tax credits and the clean fuel tax credits. There's money going into conservation and rural development and forestry. So these carbon sinks that either currently hold a lot of carbon or by restoring natural places can draw down carbon. A lot going into building efficiency, both individual homes, multifamily apartments, and business commercial buildings. And then there's a healthcare section where we're spending money, and I'm not a healthcare expert, so I'm not going to talk a lot about those. And then there's savings. So the cost of this bill is about $485 billion. There's going to be approximately $320 billion in savings from health policies that are shifting. And there's going to be some new revenue with a corporate minimum tax of 15%, with enforcement of existing tax policy and ensuring people are actually paying what they're supposed to be paying, focused primarily on or solely on those making more than $400,000 a year at a household level. And then there's a little tiny bit of what I would call the stick approach, right? There is actually a methane fee where they're going to charge natural gas producers for the methane that leaks. And it's a pretty steep fee. I believe it's $900 a metric ton of methane, and it starts there and goes up to like $1,500 a ton. So it's a huge fee. And there's a couple other pieces of revenue. So all in all, this bill is actually going to bring in about a $300 billion surplus to help pay down the deficit at the federal government level over the course of 10 years. This is 10-year totals of investment and savings. So that's the big picture. Any questions about the big picture before I dive into specific opportunities?
Maybe a stupid question, Daniel. Why is it called the Inflation Reduction Act?
The Inflation Reduction Act, because words matter and people are really good at marketing. Inflation's high, and so if we can pass an act that says it's going to reduce inflation, it helps bolster it. And the other thing that I found funny is the number of times that I'm saying Inflation Reduction Act, because it's the name of the bill. Like this phrase is being said millions and millions of times a week across the country because people are talking about it. So I don't know if there's some subconscious there. When you look at, there have been a couple different studies on will this actually reduce inflation, and it's so marginal that I mean, statisticians will say, you know, it might not. It's kind of right in the middle. Like I think there's a 2% chance of it increasing inflation and a 2% chance of it decreasing inflation. So good question. And I'm going to refer to this as the IRA, not to be confused with the Irish, is it Irish Republic Army? Is that what it is?
Republican Army, Irish
Republican Army. Kathy, you had a question.
Not a question, but an observation. This is a very interesting lesson in systems change in an experiment around large-scale systems change. The attraction that Daniel talked about earlier versus the push. There's a lot of interesting experimentation, and so it'll be interesting to watch over time to see what it can teach us around large-scale change.
That's a good point. And we were talking about this right before we started the call, that this bill would not have been passed if not for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of climate activists across the US, many of whom are coming from the young folks, mobilizing and then working together. Because even in the world of environmentalists, there are different subsets and people who want to go further and faster in different places. All of them had to come to some form of compromise because none of them got everything they wanted. But because they had such a mass uprising, if you will, of voices, it enabled Congress and President Biden to actually take this action and make it happen. And now that it's happening, you're going to see all sorts of tax incentives and financial incentives that will accelerate individual action and business action. So it's kind of like it took individuals to get this system policy. Now that the policy is in place, it's going to create more individual action, which in many ways might be, hopefully, to your point of it, this is an experiment, will this be a self-reinforcing positive feedback loop of people who are getting incentives to weatherize their home and improve the efficiency of their home, then become stronger and louder advocates for more policy to create a cleaner economy in the future because they're literally feeling and seeing the benefits themselves. So we'll see how much this actually is a self-reinforcing positive feedback loop. So let's talk about, one other thing before I get into the specifics. A huge change here is, I don't know if any of you work for nonprofits or local government agencies here in the US, but if you do, these tax credits and tax deductions are available to you now, even though you don't pay taxes. So it sounds weird, but this was a huge shift to make these available to more people and more organizations. So they have two ways that nonprofits can access these funds or local governments. One is through a direct pay, basically as if you paid taxes, you'll get a tax credit. If you spend $100,000 on solar energy, you'd get a 30% tax credit back. If you're a nonprofit and you spend $100,000, you don't file for taxes, you'll get a $30,000 check from the federal government. That's direct pay. The other way is called transferability. So when I get to the building improvement section, if you're a nonprofit and your architects and engineers design a more efficient building than a standard, you can transfer your tax deduction to the architecture and engineering firm because they pay taxes. They can see those savings themselves and then transfer, 90% of those savings back to you as the nonprofit. They'll keep a little bit for administrative fee. So it's unbelievable because a lot of the clients that we work with are nonprofits or local and state government entities. So this is available. Like Omaha Public Power District is a public power utility here in Nebraska. They're going to be able to access these tax incentives directly, as opposed to having to go through third-party power purchase agreements, which added a lot of paperwork and complication. Individuals will be able to access these. So it's amazing that got into this bill. So what does this mean for renewable energy? There's 2 tax credits right now that we're starting to ramp down, but this brings them back up to 30% and actually increases with some bonus incentives. So what does this mean externally? That the investment tax credit and the production tax credit are being renewed and brought back up to a new and higher level than before. It means that no matter where you are in the country, your utility provider is going to have more incentive to build solar and wind and battery technology to clean your grid. So without you doing anything in your home, over time, as your grid gets cleaner, your carbon footprint goes down with your electricity use. What does this mean for organizations? It means that between 6% and 30% you'll get a tax credit for on-site renewables or battery technology, maybe up to 50%. So the 6 to 30% range, you need to pay prevailing wages and you need to use a certain percentage of the labor from apprenticeship program. So this is that job creation piece and that kind of environmental justice piece. And then there's also a provision for Buy American steel and iron that can give you a 10% bonus. And there's a provision for those environmental justice areas, those energy communities, that can give you another 10%. So you might be able to qualify for a 50% tax credit on a solar array if you're a commercial entity. Individuals on your home, that you can get a 30%. And that can cover the batteries if you want. It didn't used to cover batteries. It can cover electrical panel upgrades as well. So there's a lot that can get wrapped into this. And as I mentioned, if you're a nonprofit, you can get this through direct pay or transferability, whichever works best for your organization. Building efficiency. So the cheapest way to generate power is to not use it. They joke that this is called a negawatt. The cheapest kilowatt is actually a negawatt. Avoid using it. So how do we make our buildings more efficient? How does this get incentivized? There's a tax deduction called 179D for commercial entities and nonprofits now, that based on this ASHRAE 90.1 of 2007, if you're an engineer, you get this, but you compare your building design to that standard. And then if it's 25 to 50% more efficient, you can get between 50 cents and $5 per square foot in tax deduction. This can be tens of thousands up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax deduction for the architecture and engineering firm, because this is the transferable one. If you're a private sector, you can just take it directly. And that range again is due to, are you paying prevailing wages and are you using apprenticeship labor in your project? So it incentivizes this environmental justice, workforce development, American manufacturing, and job creation. We're going to get to individuals and homes pretty soon, but this is for that commercial building or a nonprofit building. And I know that there are a couple of you in local government agencies. My understanding is that this also applies to you, even though you don't pay taxes. that especially this building efficiency one, your architecture and engineering firms can get this tax deduction and transfer those savings to you when they're designing your buildings to higher specifications and efficiency than that 2007 standard. Same thing with the renewable energy. I was on a call with somebody yesterday, private sector, who asked, what about the innovation? I think it was called the innovation credit. So you can do accelerated depreciation on equipment. These two actually stack up. So you get your 30% tax credit on renewables, and then you get that like 100% accelerated depreciation write-offs in your taxes if you're a private sector company for that renewable energy piece. Clean transportation. So what does this mean? What's in the bill for this? First of all, there's going to be a huge increase in electric vehicle demand because over time, more and more individuals are going to be purchasing electric vehicles because of this personal tax credit of $7,500 for new EVs and $4,000 for used. There used to be tax credits for new EVs, but they had caps and limits. And each manufacturer could only have so many, like I think 200,000. So Tesla burned through their 200,000 pretty quickly. Those caps are now gone. This does get a little bit challenging because they're really pushing for American manufacturing here for the battery technology. So this $7,500 tax credit is split in half, and half of it is dependent on like the final assembly of the vehicle, and the other half is dependent on the battery manufacturing, or maybe it's the battery manufacturing and then the where the elements coming from, the minerals coming from, which that's a whole nother conversation. Do we have, the world has enough of these precious metals to build all these batteries, but a lot of it lays on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And we have not gotten into deep sea mining very much at all. We're talking like 2.5 miles below the surface of the ocean. And so what are the environmental impacts on that? And can those minerals that are laying on the ocean floor, like literally laying on the ocean floor, can they be harvested in a responsible way? Anytime we're extracting anything from the earth, there's going to be some change to that ecosystem. So we have to think about, there's a lot of trade-offs.
Daniel, quick question though. These tax credits are to the manufacturers of the EV, or are these the personal tax credits for the person buying the EV?
These are the personal tax credits for the person buying them. And I'm sure the car sellers will have different ways to access that, whether they reduce the price or they let you pay full price and then you take the tax credit when you file for taxes. Yeah. And then also new is this $4,000 tax credit for purchasing a used electric vehicle. So this will actually, the average car in the US is on the road for 10 to 12 years before it goes away. So if you think about today, the 2022 model is going to be around for a decade. There are cars today that were manufactured in the late 2000s. And so how do we accelerate that turnover of vehicle stock so that it gets cleaner faster? And this is a great way to do that by incentivizing the sale of used electric vehicles. What does this mean for commercial fleets? So if you have a business that has a lot of vehicles, you can qualify up for a tax credit for vehicles under 14,000 pounds and over 14,000 pounds. If you're a nonprofit, you can also access these through direct pay. And there's also going to be an increase in the DARA funding. This is a grant program that's been around for years that reduces emissions focused on air quality so that people aren't breathing in a lot of fumes. There's going to be more money going into that program that already has a mechanism for distribution. One of the things I like to point out with the vehicle piece, there are a lot of challenges around it. And let me back up a second on this one. It's going to take probably a year or two for many of the EVs to qualify for this American manufacturing, because these facilities, some of these facilities don't even exist today. So of all of the EVs on the market today, I think only about 30% of them qualify for this new tax credit. So don't just go out and buy an EV and think you're going to get this. Do your homework and make sure that the one you're purchasing qualifies for these American manufacturing pieces. Those American manufacturing pieces, as far as I can tell, and I've looked at a lot of different sources, don't apply for the commercial vehicle. So you have more options for manufacturing across the globe for commercial vehicles. And this is the systems change policy wonk that's fascinating. They're going to pay 30% of the difference between, let's say you're going to buy a diesel truck, box truck to haul stuff around like FedEx, or you can buy an electric one. The electric one is going to cost more. They're going to cover 30% of that cost difference up to these numbers based on weight. So they're not going to cover the entire cost of the vehicle. They're not going to cover the entire incremental cost difference, but they're going to incentivize you to take that incremental cost difference by discounting 30% up to these limits. And electric vehicles need places to charge. So the Infrastructure Act that passed was it spring or last fall, is going to deploy like 500,000, 500,000 chargers across the country, but they're focused on those interstate corridors that have high volumes of traffic and probably really fast charging. This is a fantastic program for businesses and nonprofits to install chargers on your site to charge your vehicles or let your guests or customers or employees charge their vehicles. And it went from a $30,000 limit per site to $100,000 per charger. So it's huge. It still is 30%, but if you're going to put in a super fast charger, you can get a lot of money back on that 30% discount. To the environmental justice piece, this particular funding program you only qualify if you're in a low income community. So if you're in a high income community, you can't access this tax credit at all. Just pay full price for your chargers. You'll be fine. And this one also is available for nonprofits and state and local governments with direct pay and transferability. So what about us as individuals? What about your employees or coworkers? What about your guests and customers? I like to leverage this when I'm talking to our partners who are zoos and aquariums and airports and say, look, you have millions of people come through your door. There's an educational opportunity here because this bill only gets to that 40% reduction if people use it. So I'm going to change screens here and show you a calculator that I found that I'm sure there's going to be more that get built up. But this is the one that's out there today because there are a lot of variables that I just wanted to do an example calculation for folks. So this is from Rewiring America. They've been involved in a lot of the policy discussions. They're really plugged in, pun intended, with the clean technology economy. And so there are a lot of individual incentives for different things you can do in your home. And there are tax credits for those who have a high enough income that they're paying taxes. And they have rebates. So one of the environmental justice pieces is, well, that's great, we have tax credits, but what about the people who don't essentially pay no taxes because they make so little? They can't participate in this policy when it's all tax credits. So they have rebates at the time of purchase that they will have a discount on their appliance or their product or service to make their home more energy efficient. So this is huge. A note on the rebates. The rebates are going to be distributed from the Federal Department of Energy to each state's energy office. So each state's energy office is going to be responsible for designing and rolling out and managing the funds that come through for the rebates. The guidance from the federal government is pretty clear. These are the amounts of money for these types of appliances or upgrades to homes, but it's going to be up to the states to deliver the funding. So I'm going to be curious to see if there's a political divide between some states who are really good at this and some states who make it as hard as possible to distribute this money, yet to be determined. So what you can do here is you can enter in your zip code. So I entered in an Omaha zip code. I'm going to say they're a homeowner versus a renter and a household income of 90,000, joint filing, and let's say there's 4 people. And calculate. So this family, homeowner family of 4, could see upfront discounts of 14,000. These are the rebates. This is what the state energy offices are going to set up, which might take a year or 2, depending on your state. So this is not going to be available January. The tax credits, because this family makes enough that they would pay some taxes, they could get up to $5,000 in tax credits. Those are available January 1st. So next year you do some of these tax credit incentives and you can get the tax credit when you file your 2023 taxes. And it's estimated that this family could save about $1,500 per year. So what does this look like for you all? Heat pump water heaters or something. So many of you probably have a natural gas water heater. Some of you might have an electric water heater. A heat pump water heater is an electric water heater that actually grabs heat from your air and transfers it into your water. So you're not using electricity in the same way to just heat up and heat the water, and you're not using natural gas. It's much more efficient. You can get up to a $1,750, I believe this is the rebate for you. You can click more info and it will talk a little bit more about this. So upfront discount for this particular example is $1,750. You could get a $2,000 tax credit on this one. It's usually 30% when you're talking about the tax credits up to $2,000. I'm seeing a lot of things in chat. Sorry, I'm going to just check the lesson, the questions here. Does anybody know if solar panels are becoming more efficient? They are becoming more efficient, but they're not at 90%. They're still in the 30s. They used to be in the 20s. Solar technology has come down in cost by about 80 to 90% over the last decade because of all the investments in research and technology. Chris responded with some of that too. And there's one of the challenges is storage. There's a lot being talked about there with batteries and other technology. Is there a cap on income for receiving the tax credits? I believe there is. I know there is for the electric vehicles. I do not know if there is for some of these home improvement ones. That's something I should look into. How is low income community defined by the IRA? It does cross rural and urban geographies. In fact, one of the things I forgot to call out is the electric vehicle chargers have to be in a low income community or a rural community. I don't even think the income matters in the rural community. I'd have to go back and look. Everybody I've been presenting to is in an urban community, so I focused on that. So thank you for that question. There is that provision specifically on the EV chargers. And the low income community, I haven't found a definitive map that I can say with 100% certainty. There was a map that I found when there was the COVID dollars going out that had the labeling of what was a low income community. Based on, this is census data, so it gets updated every year, and your state and locality is going to be different because cost of living is different. There is a map that the White House just put out last week that talks about environmental justice areas, and it looks at multiple factors for what qualifies as an environmental justice area. I'm still waiting for like I found that map for COVID funding. I'm waiting for a map that says this is for IRA. And this will help you know, do I qualify for these tax credits or not? So I'm not going to go through every single individual thing here and explain it, but you can see heat pumps and air conditioner, or a heat pump, air conditioner, and heater. This is a device that both heats and cools your home if you're not familiar with heat pumps. For some reason, there was a lot of talk about how heat pumps got really favored. They're a very efficient way to heat and cool homes, and they have a much higher tax deduction or tax credit available and rebate available for folks. So $8,000 up to $8,000 rebate for those low income families. Electric stove. So part of this is electrification, shifting from natural gas appliances to electric ones. Heat pump clothes dryers. This is a newer technology that's out there. Again, it's cheaper to move heat than it is to generate heat. So if you can get that heat pump to pump heat from the air into your device, if you want to get into nerdy refrigeration and thermodynamics, I'm happy to later. Something new here is the electric panel upgrades. Previous tax incentives did not really account for, hey, I want to put an EV charger in my home, but I have to pay a couple thousand or several $1,000s to upgrade my electrical panel because it's not big enough. I don't have enough power coming into my house, so that's included. Basic weatherization is going to be things like insulating your home, air sealing your home. That is one of the cheapest ways to save energy if you haven't done that. Wiring, and then whole home energy reduction. This is something where you can kind of like take a package of how efficient are you making your home compared to a reference point. And then you can get this. And this, sorry, I forgot to mention, this whole section here, these are the upfront discounts that this family example would qualify for. The tax credits, so let's just change this and let's just say that this is a higher income home. Let's say they make $200,000 a year for a family of 4. Calculate, you're going to see these upfront discounts go away, but you're going to see the tax credits increase substantially. So rooftop solar installation, you can get 30% off, geothermals 30%, battery storage 30%. Your EV tax credit, you can get the full amount. Electric vehicle charger, you'd qualify for up to $1,000 tax credit. Again, this is 30% of the cost up to $1,000. The heat pump, $2,000 tax credit, whether that's a water heater or the air heater, electric panel, and basic weatherization. So Chris put this calculator link into the chat. So if you're in the United States, you can just do this calculation for yourself, put in your zip code, income, number of people in your home. And it's, again, it's the one that I found that I'm trusting, but I still want to verify, right? And before you go in and do something, you're going to want to look at your local information and maybe check with your accountant if you're doing this with this idea of a guarantee that you're doing it for this. There is a limit. This website doesn't tell you this. There's an annual limit. I believe it's $1,200. So you can combine these things to get a $1,200 tax credit in 1 year, and then you can wait and do another couple things a second year and get that $1,200 tax credit. You're not going to get a $20,000 tax credit in 1 year. This website's a little misleading in that way. Questions on the business tax credits, deductions, or the individual ones? It's a lot to take in, but as you can see, there's a lot of incentives here that will accelerate individual and organizational action. Kathy.
I am struck by the layered complexity that is embedded in this. Like they actually began to think about the interdependencies of how all of this works. And that's kind of stunning, I think.
A large part of that is because the environmentalists who are really focused on environmental justice were at the table helping design this policy. So it wasn't, and I'm going to be stereotypical for a minute, it wasn't a bunch of wealthy Congress people who are representing every income level, but they themselves are relatively well off, if not very well off, designing policy for the average American. These were people who were advocating for those who are more disproportionately affected, who have lower incomes, because in the past, the renewable energy stuff was just tax credits. You can't, if you don't make money, you can't get a tax credit. It does you no good. So it leaves out a whole swath of the American population. So getting the right people at the table and getting the voices of people who are impacted by this is the people participate in what they help create. And this is involved the people closest to the problem in the crafting of the solution. You will get better solutions.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Well, if you don't have questions, we have a question for you. Chris, do you want to take us away with our question?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. But before we do that, just so I know, do we want to move into breakouts with this question or just stay in a big group? What's the sense of the group here? Because we have about 20 minutes max for our time here. What do you think, Daniel or Kathy or anybody else? What do you prefer?
I'm open to either. Does the group here have a preference? Do you want to have more time to have your voice in the room through a breakout room and small group conversation, or would you rather hear the answers to all the questions that come up? I'm seeing a lot of nods on stay in the large group, big group. All right, keep it a big group.
Great. All right, so so thank you, Daniel. Wow, what a great presentation! I learned a lot. And I love how you synthesized it. Well, I'm sure it's a 1,000-page document or more or whatever it is, but thank you for synthesizing all of that and to show both the individual action possibility, organizational as well. All right. So the question, very simple, is, I put it in the chat, is what actions will you take with this new information that was shared today and whatever else you know about the IRA, and at a personal level and an organizational level? So certainly share from your own personal or what your organization might be doing or thinking about doing, or what your intention is in your organization or for you personally. So that's it. And if we're staying in the big group, let's just open it up to anybody who wants to share and around that question, your particular action. What do you want to do? Oh, Marianne, I see you speaking, but I don't hear your volume. You're off mute, but I don't think we hear you. So you might be on your own mute on your computer, separate from the Zoom mute.
Still can't hear.
How's this?
There you go.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Just a quick point that, Daniel, I know I've asked this before in terms of recordings, that you've done such a nice job on recapping some of these really big things. And I just want to take this recording and send it to my family, or send it to my my adult children who maybe would take an interest, because you hear this stuff on the news and the media, and people still, your framing of it as a hopeful, and the excitement in it and the complexity of it and the long-termness of it. I really am excited to want to share the link. So
Yes, please do. The link will be up usually a couple days afterwards.
okay. Thank you.
I'm super pumped that local governments are included because we don't pay taxes. We're tax exempt. And for a long time, even though like I work for a super well-funded park agency, funding is always an issue, even if it's well-funded, especially with sustainability and renewable energy projects. It's very difficult to get people to agree to a larger outset cost. So with the rebates that are available, and even like if we hire a consultant and they pass savings at 90% or 80% onto us, that will result in like a comparable outset cost to a regular traditional project. So I'm looking forward to having my park leadership be much more invested into renewables and all different kinds of sustainability stuff. And then on a personal level, I'm super excited that there's rebates for electrical wiring because I live in an old house that needs some upgrades. And this is like the perfect time to do it. It looks like in the next couple of years. So.
That's
Fantastic.
great. Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Beautiful. Who else would like to share?
This is Pam.
Oh,
Okay,
great. Go ahead.
go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. No, you go.
Okay.
Who is-
So this is Pam Perry, and I work for Visiting Nurse Association, which is also affiliated with Future Seals, Nebraska. And we have preliminary designs for a $47 million camp in Blair, Nebraska. And thus far, the energy efficiency has not been a high priority in the design because we're really focused on it being barrier-free and very inclusive, which is wonderful. But I really appreciate this opportunity to take back information on what is available through this new legislation and incentivize our organization and then the architects and engineers and construction companies that we work with to leverage this to be able to have, gosh, maybe we can even be net zero, but to really expand our vision for what this facility could be as a model for the nation. So thanks.
Cool.
That's great,
Pam, that's super exciting to hear you're working on that. And so that 179D tax deduction is eligible for facilities that are completed and go online starting January 1st or after. So even if you're in the design phase, this is a perfect opportunity to take advantage of that. Even if it's beginning to be under construction, if you did happen to design it well enough to qualify, you could still be eligible for those tax credits as long as that building is going online after January 1st of 2023.
Awesome. Okay, that's good to know. All right. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Pam. Beautiful. Who
I
else?
think that an individual act that I might do about 10 years ago, I invested a lot into creating a thermo envelope at home. But it's been 10 years and the technology keeps evolving. So I'm thinking I might go find somebody to do a reassessment and see how I'm doing and what I might do to improve. So that's one of my takeaways as an individual.
Nice. Thank you, Kathy. Who else? I think I saw Mary. Mary Fertig had her hand up.
Yes, in following what Kathleen is saying, we've had our home assessed for some solar energy, solar panels, and we have a lot of shade in our neighborhood, a lot of trees. And so at that time, the person who would be doing it said, can't do it. You don't have enough percentage of roof to make it worthwhile, and so on. And that's been, I would say, at least 5 years ago. Has that changed? I mean, I can't say that we have any less shade, but I keep thinking that the technology is going to become something that we can do a portion of a roof that could still be worthwhile, or is it still not possible?
Well, it really just comes down to how much are you investing and how much are you hoping to save financially and with emissions reduction, because the solar panels, as Kathy asked and Chris alluded to, are becoming more efficient. So if they said this solar panel set would only generate this much energy and reduce emissions by this much because you're mostly shaded or shaded most of the day, you can now put the same number of solar panels that are more efficient and would generate more electricity and reduce emissions more. But is it incrementally, how much better is that?
Got it.
So that's, you could still ask, but I don't know what that trade-off point would be. And anybody can pay for solar panels. It's a question of, is the return going to be worth it for you from an emissions reductions, energy savings?
And I'm sure that's what the fellow was guessing, is that we would think it would be not worth it because we wouldn't gain enough.
Yeah,
So
Mary, and there are solutions, Mary. There are other solutions if you really explore this, and these are called array solutions, where you take it off your house and just move it into a sunny spot. Your little solar array is there, and the wires go back to your house. So a lot of people are doing that now, where the solar panels are not just on the house; they're on a little bit of a grid on your hillside that's 100 yards away or something like that. So you want to really explore lots of options besides just on your house.
So what do I Google to find the kind of people that would help to make some of those assessments beyond just the standard locally?
Great. Locally,
Yeah,
you want to say solar. Yeah, solar installers. Just solar, and then type your city or the biggest city near you. Probably it's not going to be your local, but solar installers, and many of them will have multiple solutions as part of their business.
Okay,
and this is a consumer beware lesson a little bit, because with all of this coming down, it's going to become a wild west of
Right.
people who will come in and say, have we got a deal for you? And it's a deal for them, and it might be beneficial to you, it might not, because they're taking advantage of these things. So if somebody comes in and says, I'm going to give you the solar deal, and they don't mention the tax credit at all, you need to ask them, do I qualify for this tax credit, or have you as the installer taken the tax credit and included it into the price and then marked up the price of my thing? So you do have to practice, just like any large purchase, informed consumerism. And a recommendation that I've lived by is that if you're going to spend more than a few $1,000s on something in your home, get at least 3 different estimates. I mean, they can vary widely, and quality and cost.
Thank you. Thanks. And I want to second what Mary Ann said. I don't see her at the moment on my screen, of sharing this video with my family and others, because it does help to have a convenient translation by someone who speaks the same language I do. Thank you for that, Daniel.
Hi, folks. I'm putting in the link to the recording page. So
I just got that for you, Chris.
Oh, you did? You did? You just did? Oh, okay,
Yep.
got it. All right, great. Awesome. Well, let's see. Anybody else? Well, I'll just share me briefly too, because I've been mulling on this, thinking about it. And I'm actually sad this came out when I moved out of the United States. Many of you know I live in Costa Rica now. So I'll be exploring what is here and available in Costa Rica for sustainability and being more smart. But on a personal level, I was exploring this with Daniel before the call started, the environmental justice piece. Remember, he talked about that. It is something that I want to explore. If there are dollars in funding for me and the work I'm thinking of doing with nature-inspired leadership, I'm also thinking about doing that for youth, young adults, kind of 18 to 22, 24, and would happy to do that in areas in low-income communities, or, where there's a need for that kind of education and learning, environmental education and action. So that's something I want to explore relative to the IRA, if there's possibility for funding and support to create like a camp, like a leadership camp for kids in Costa Rica too. That's what I'm excited about. Like bring them down here and have them have that experience here. And in a personal level, I mean, just however I, just be an advocate in the U.S. for my family and friends and others. As many of you said, you want to share the recording with, I want to share the information with my sister and her family and my, to see about them taking advantage of this and being cleaner in their footprint as well. That's it. That's me.
Melanie?
Chris, I'd just like to say, if you need any adults to help facilitate that in Costa Rica, you just let me know.
I will do
Always happy to lend a hand.
Great.
And then I actually have two things. One was a kind of quick question for Daniel. In the timeline of this, I mean, when you look at what the projection is, I hope they took into account kickoff. I just know, like, especially when the government is involved, like you said, it will take some time to get these things set up. Do you know if that is built into that frame to still hit 40%?
Yeah. Princeton, I think Net Zero or Zero Energy Lab is one. There's been like 3 major organizations analyzing the impact and the estimates and doing all of this math. There's actually a brand new podcast that just came across my desk from Craig. The Ezra Klein Show, the most recent episode, is like an hour and 50 minutes long, going into the ins and outs of this and how estimates are made in our pathway as a country to decarbonization. So yes, they took into account that some of these programs will take longer to set up. What they had to, though, guess at is how much of this money will be taken advantage of, because it requires us as individuals to go do the improvements so we can get the tax credit, or the businesses to invest in their commercial fleet or their commercial buildings to then access the tax credit. So they assumed a certain adoption rate. And I'm not in the weeds to know how far they did that, but the Ezra Klein Show might actually get into that, because one of the person being interviewed was one of the key people who was constantly running different scenarios to inform people in the rooms making the policy as they were doing trade-offs. They were coming back to this Princeton lab and saying, if we take this out, what does it do for our emissions reduction? If we put this in, what does it do?
So
And then, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Mary. I just was going to say, one of the things that excites me about this, I work for a company called Optimize Systems, and we literally optimize systems. We work with commercial and nonprofits, not residential things, but I'm super happy that nonprofit entities were taken into account here, because I know when we go out and talk to people, nonprofits are often a lot more dialed into kind of the justice side of things. But as you can imagine, often don't have a lot of money. And so generally our work results in a energy reduction and a cost savings, but you still have to have some money up front. And where we're looking at making changes to existing things where you don't always have to buy renewables or new equipment, which is where a lot of the rebates have been in the past, is buy new. Sometimes you just need to fix or literally optimize what's there. So I was happy to see those changes there as well. If I can steal a phrase from Craig, it is the eat your energy efficiency vegetables before your renewables desserts. So I always hear that, but so lots of good things I felt came out of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Any other either questions or comments or shares?
Well, I was just curious, what I was about to raise is, how much will politics affect the long-term application of this IRA policy? And so, for example, if the majority in Congress changes soon, or if there is a change in presidency, can any of this be ripped away, or is it integrated well enough that it will sustain itself for long enough to have an effect? I mean, I realize it's all hypothetical, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are around that.
So I'm an optimist. I'll qualify my statement as that.
Yes, you are.
This bill is so comprehensive and almost everybody gets something from it. I think that it would be very hard for a new Congress to change the law. So that, yes, it is a congressional law that's been signed by the president. That means a new Congress could come and change the law. But we all know how hard it is to get Congress to pass something.
Yes,
That's part of the design of our government. So now that it's passed, it's going to be harder to take it away, because there are going to be businesses and people from all sides of the political spectrum directly benefiting from these tax credits and rebates. And so it will very likely be very difficult to change and take that away once people start to experience it next year.
Well, and
I don't know about the legal challenges. because that's the other thing, is things could be sued for stopping. But one of the other smart things about this bill is that 179B, building efficiency, that's been around for several years already. They tweaked it and built it and made it better. The renewable energy tax credits and the electric vehicle tax credits, those are programs that have been around before and have not been legally challenged. So what they did is they took a lot of things that were working and they made them better and bigger. And so I don't think that there's a lot of risk of legal action that would stop a lot of this stuff from happening.
That's good. And the more
Great
people
question.
invest in it, you know, financially as well as philosophically, the more invested they are, the less likely they are to resist or waste their investment.
I'll share one other thought for those of us in Minnesota, is that NSP, our major energy supplier, is doing a lot of incentives around solar gardens. And I joined the solar garden thing because I had shade in my house and I couldn't do solar on my house. But you can then, it helps NSP get to their energy goal of, what's the reduction, Daniel? You might know this number better than I am. What's NSP trying to get to? 80% carbon free?
Are you talking about XL Energy?
XL.
Is 80% by 2030.
By 2030. And so any individual who signs up for a solar garden helps XL get there. And then we benefit with a decreased energy bill, plus we're doing something good for the environment. So all good.
Maybe something from the European perspective. So first of all, excited to see this because the US is, I think, the biggest CO2 producer. So if you get to the 50% reduction, that is, yeah, wonderful. So I think I have two questions. Yeah. So how likely is it that this target will be met based on these measures? And second is, you said, hey, you dismissed a bit the carbon tax as a stick thing, whilst it actually is a cost. Yeah, it's a cost to the world. So it's actually proper economy or accounting. So I'm still curious about your view on the carbon taxation or including it in the accounting.
Yeah. So two pieces. What was your first comment again? It already flew throughout my head.
How likely is it that this will lead only subsidies to these?
Oh, right. Everything I've been reading, they are fairly confident that we're going to get that 40% reduction by 2030. And there's a lot of unknowns, but the unknowns are like a positive unknown. It could be even bigger. It would shock me if a bunch of Americans leave this money on the table, business owners and individuals, because there's a lot there that maybe some of the, to Mary Ann's question about states and taking the funding down to their citizens, some states might slow or build friction into that system, but that's a relatively small bucket of money compared to all the other things that are happening with manufacturing and renewables. To your second piece about carbon tax, I still think carbon tax is a very effective tool, but what we've learned, at least in this moment in time, is that in America, people don't like taxes. They don't like sticks. They don't like to be punished, even if it really is a true cost of accounting, right? Capitalism's a good idea. We should actually try it sometime. So zooming out from the US, it may be that carbon tax actually takes better hold. It already has internationally more than in the US. But in the US today, this is a landmark bill. It's the largest investment in climate action, I believe, across the globe to date. And so going into November, when we have COP27, the Council of Parties 27 in Egypt, the US can come to the table and hopefully come with that credibility and trust built up and hopefully catalyze some of the action that other countries are going to do. And maybe, I don't know, different countries are going to have different approaches, but maybe some of the lessons we learned for how this got passed with a lot of different political ideologies, it was passed on party lines, but it still had the support from enough Americans to say, this is good, do it. That maybe some of the other countries will copy some of the successes, maybe incentive-based, maybe not. So I think carbon tax is still out there and will be on the international stage. I kind of think that in the United States, carbon tax is dead for a few years at least, because this bill passed and is going to achieve a great deal without that.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you for that international perspective and question, Frank.
Lenny,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Lenny. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
going to
so I
say.
have just a quick question. I need to drop for another call, but so the projected carbon savings or emission savings versus the reality, where is that going to be tracked and how can we see that?
Good question. There's a lot of funding in here to actually go into better tracking systems as well, but most of our carbon emissions in the US come from fossil fuel plants. And so you can track those emissions are reported on an annual basis. Every utility has to publicly report its emissions to the EPA. That's where you're going to see that. Like an individual business becoming more efficient might be hard to track. An individual home becoming more efficient might be hard to track, but you're going to see the efficiencies showing at these fossil fuel plants, or when you have so much renewable energy that you can close a fossil fuel plant, you're going to see those emissions change. And then tailpipe emissions are another large component of these emissions. Are you going to know how many emissions dropped if you go from a gas powered car to an electric? You can kind of guess, right? And they'll do the math and say this car is this much and this car is that much. But what you can do is you can look at how many gas powered cars are manufactured each year and sold, and you can do some pretty real calculations with that. And I just saw this morning, there's like 300 million, a huge number of dollars going into air quality monitoring. So they're building in sensoring so that we can actually get smarter about what the environmental impacts are in our communities. And that's just one portion. There's a lot of money going into local health departments for environmental justice and air quality and other areas that I didn't even get into. I was really focused on what you might be able to do as an individual or as an organization. There's a ton of other programming that I didn't even touch on.
Great, thank you very much. I need to drop. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
great to see you.
I got to roll. Do you want to wrap us up, Kathy? I have to leave right now. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Bye,
All
everyone.
right, bye, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again. Next time, we think it's time to just take a pause. And there's been so much change in the world over the last year. When we last asked this question, what are you seeing? Let's do a little kind of collective scan and see what's changing and what's trying to emerge and what is dying or maybe dying faster and what's the messy middle. So we'll be doing that in October on the 18th, and then we'll have 2 additional ones with Marianne wrapping us up in December with horses, leadership, and personal growth and evolution. So thank you so much for coming today, and we'll see you next month. Take care.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.